2 p.m. Tuesday. Milan Pickett drops to her knees on the cold marble of the Page Estate's second-floor corridor. Her scrub brush scrapes against the stone, a harsh, rhythmic sound in a house that feels like a mausoleum. Her heart hammers against her ribs, not just from the exhaustion of hunger, but from the sight of the men standing guard at the end of the hall. Men in dark suits with earpieces and holstered weapons. They look at her like she is invisible, like she is nothing more than the dirt she is scrubbing away. But it isn't the guns that make Milan's blood run cold. It is the silence. At 24 years old, Milan has been invisible her whole life. She has spent the last 2 years running from a debt that isn't hers, sleeping in alleyways and eating scraps. She knows what survival looks like, but she has never seen a silence this loud. Behind the double mahogany doors at the end of the hall, there is no sound of playing, no laughter, just the suffocating weight of a tragedy unfolding in slow motion. Dear God, Milan thinks, dipping her raw, red hands into the bucket of soapy water, don't let them find me here. Don't let them see how shaken and dirty I am. She unconsciously touches the bruise on her shoulder, hidden beneath her uniform, a reminder of the life she is running from. Suddenly, the double doors fly open. Terrence Page steps out like a thunderstorm breaking. The master of the house, the king of the city. At 32, he is a man who can silence a room just by walking into it. But today, he looks like a man being eaten alive from the inside out. His dress shirt is unbuttoned at the collar, his tie gone. His jaw is darkened by days of stubble, and his eyes, usually sharp and calculating, are rimmed with red, hollowed out by a grief no weapon can fight. They say Terrence Page has burned down rival organizations for looking at him wrong, yet here he stands, defeated by 2 little girls who are fading away before his eyes. "Sir," the head of security steps forward, his voice low. "The new specialist from Switzerland is on the jet. He'll be here in 4 hours. 4 hours? Terrence's laugh is a broken, jagged sound. They don't have 4 hours, Marcus. Look at them. They're ghosts. They're wasting away, and I have billions of dollars, and I can't buy them a single appetite." He runs a hand through his hair, gripping the strands tight. "I am useless," Terrence whispers, the venom in his voice directed entirely at himself. "I can protect this city, but I can't get my own daughters to swallow a spoonful of soup." Milan freezes, her scrub brush hovering over the floor. The raw agony in his voice pierces through her own fear. She knows that tone. She knows the feeling of being hollowed out by hunger, of fading away because the world is too harsh to exist in. She risks a glance upward. Through the open door, she sees them, the twins. 2 tiny figures in a massive bed, hooked up to monitors. They aren't crying, they're too weak for that. They're staring at the ceiling, silent, pale, and ethereal. Terrence turns back to the room, his shoulders slumping. "Get the chef," he barks, though the fight is leaving him. "Tell him to try the broth again. If they don't eat—" He doesn't finish the sentence. He doesn't have to. Milan watches him, her heart shattering. She has seen monsters in her life, loan sharks, abusers, thieves. Terrence Page is supposed to be the biggest monster of them all. But right now, he is just a father watching his world end. And in that moment, something stirs inside Milan. An instinct stronger than her fear, stronger than her shame about her dirty face and her poverty. She stands up. She leaves her bucket. She walks past the stunned guards who are too surprised by the audacity of the cleaning girl to stop her. Terrence is standing by the bed, his head in his hands. He doesn't hear her soft footsteps on the carpet. Milan approaches the bed. The smell of antiseptic is overwhelming, but beneath it she smells the faint scent of fear coming from the girls. They are terrified of the doctors. They are terrified of the needles. Milan doesn't speak. She doesn't have a medical degree. She doesn't have money. She simply starts to hum. It's a low, raspy melody, a song her grandmother used to hum when there was no food in the house, a song meant to fill the belly with warmth when there was nothing else to eat. Terrence's head snaps up. He spins around, his eyes widening with fury at the intrusion. Who the hell are... But the words die in his throat, because one of the twins, the girl on the left, has turned her head. For the first time in weeks, her eyes focus. She looks at Milan, at the dirt smudge on her cheek, at the kindness in her tired eyes. Milan reaches into her apron pocket. She shouldn't have it, it's stealing, but she saved a single, small cracker from her own meager lunch, intending to eat it later. She breaks off a tiny piece. She holds it out, her hand trembling. "It's okay," Milan whispers, her voice rough with disuse, but warm as a hearth fire. "I know you're tired. I know it hurts, but you have to stay." Terrence watches, frozen, his breath caught in his lungs. He watches as the dirty maid, the nobody he didn't even know existed, does what the best doctors in the world couldn't. The little girl opens her mouth. To survive in the Page mansion, one had to be made of air. Milan learned this within her first hour. She kept her head down, her spine curved in perpetual submission, scrubbing the intricate patterns of the marble floors until her knuckles turned raw and white. She was a ghost in a gray uniform, drifting through hallways that smelled of lemon polish and terror. The mansion was a fortress of silence, but it was a silence pulled tight as a violin string, ready to snap. "I don't care about excuses," a deep voice thundered from the grand staircase. Milan froze, shrinking into the shadow of a large potted fern. Terrence Page descended the stairs, and the very atmosphere of the house seemed to drop 10 degrees. He moved with the predatory grace of a wolf, his tailored suit straining against broad shoulders that carried the weight of a criminal empire. Beside him, the head chef, a man who likely cooked for kings, was trembling. "Sir, the girls, they just refuse the texture of..." "Then you find a texture they accept," Terrence said. His voice wasn't loud, it was lethal. "You have 1 hour. If they don't eat tonight, don't bother coming back tomorrow. In fact, don't bother staying in this city." The chef fled toward the kitchen, pale as a sheet. Milan held her breath, pressing herself against the wall. She saw the cold calculation in Terrence's eyes, the ruthless efficiency of a man who solved problems by eliminating them. He was a monster, everyone said so. But as the chef disappeared, Milan watched the monster crumble. Terrence stopped outside the double doors of the nursery. He hesitated, his hand hovering over the brass handle. His shoulders slumped, the terrifying posture vanishing to reveal a man exhausted down to his marrow. He rubbed a hand over his face, dragging down the skin, exposing the red-rimmed eyes of a father who hadn't slept in weeks. He pushed the door open, leaving it slightly ajar. Milan knew she should move, should run back to the safety of the servants' quarters, but she was paralyzed by the scene through the crack in the door. The nursery was dim, illuminated only by the blinking lights of medical equipment. In the center of the vast room, 2 small beds looked like rafts lost at sea. Terrence approached them, dropping to his knees on the plush rug. He didn't look like a Don anymore. He looked like a beggar. "Bella? Sophia?" he whispered, his voice cracking. He reached through the bars of the crib, stroking a tiny, pale hand that looked too fragile to hold. "Please, babies, just a little bit. Papa is here. Papa would give you the world, anything you want. Just, please, look at me." The only response was the mechanical hiss of an oxygen monitor. From her hiding spot in the shadows, Milan felt a sharp, familiar ache in her chest. She saw the most powerful man in the city shattered by 2 little girls who wouldn't wake up. She saw the tyrant dissolve into a puddle of grief. She recognized that look. It was the same look she saw in the mirror every day, the look of someone who had tried everything and still had nothing left to give. The scream tore through the heavy velvet silence of the hallway like a jagged knife. It wasn't the cry of a healthy child, it was the thin, high-pitched wail of pure agony. Milan dropped her bucket, gray water sloshing over the rim and soaking into the expensive carpet. Inside the nursery, chaos reigned. 3 nurses fluttered around the cribs like panicked birds, checking monitors and adjusting tubes. A specialist was shouting into a phone, his voice rising in panic as he argued with a colleague on the other end. Terrence stood in the center of the storm, his face a mask of helpless fury, his hands clenched into fists at his sides. "Do something," he roared, the sound bouncing off the hand-painted walls. "Make it stop. They're in pain." "We're trying, Mr. Page. The vitals are spiking. We can't stabilize the heart rate." No one was looking at the girls. They were looking at the machines. They were looking at the furious man in the expensive suit. The twins were drowning in the noise, terrified by the very people trying to save them. Milan didn't decide to move. Her feet simply obeyed an ancient instinct. She slipped through the open door, a shadow amidst the glaring lights. She smelled the antiseptic, the sweat of the terrified staff, and the underlying scent of sour fear coming from the cribs. She reached the first crib. The twin, Bella, was arching her back, her tiny mouth open in a silent scream, face twisting violet. Milan didn't check a monitor. She didn't ask permission. She reached out with rough, red hands, hands that had scrubbed toilets and dug through trash, and laid them gently on the child's feverish forehead. "Shh," she whispered. It was a sound softer than the hum of the machines. The chaos around them blurred. The shouting doctors, the beeping alarms, it all faded into background noise. Milan leaned over the rail and began to hum. It wasn't a classical melody. It was a broken, simple tune she used to hum to herself in the alleyways to keep the cold away. A low, vibrating thrum deep in her throat. Sleep now, the rain is gone. The effect was instantaneous. Bella's back relaxed. Her frantic, unseeing eyes darted toward the sound. She gasped, a wet, ragged intake of breath, and then went still. In the next crib, Sophia stopped thrashing. She turned her head, seeking the source of the vibration. Milan kept humming, closing her eyes, pouring every ounce of warmth she had left into the melody. She felt a tiny, cold hand brush against her wrist. Bella's fingers, thin as bird bones, curled around Milan's thumb. They held on with a desperate, shocking strength. The room had gone deathly silent. Milan opened her eyes. The nurses had stopped moving. The specialist had lowered his phone, and at the foot of the crib stood Terrence Page. He wasn't looking at the machines. He was staring at Milan. His eyes, usually sharp enough to cut glass, were wide with disbelief. He looked from his daughter's peaceful face to the dirty, trembling maid who held her hand. He looked as if he had just watched water turn into wine. For the first time in months, the nursery was quiet. The only sound left was the low, steady rhythm of a poor woman's lullaby. Terrence stared at Milan's hand wrapped in his daughter's tiny fingers. The silence in the room was heavier than the screaming had been. Milan tried to pull away, terrifying realization crashing over her. She had touched the boss's child, she with her unwashed hair and uniform stained with cleaning fluid. "I'm sorry," she whispered, her voice trembling so violently the words barely formed. She yanked her hand back, but Bella whimpered, a sharp, protesting sound that made every adult in the room freeze. Terrence moved. He didn't walk, he stalked, closing the distance between them in 2 long strides. Milan flinched, instinctively raising a shoulder to guard her face, her eyes squeezing shut. It was a reflex born of years of dodging blows, a map of her history written in a single movement. Terrence stopped dead. He saw the flinch. He saw the way she curled in on herself like a beaten dog expecting the boot. His jaw tightened, a muscle feathering in his cheek. "Leave us," he commanded. "But sir, the vitals," the specialist started. "Out," Terrence barked. Milan jumped at the shout, pressing herself against the crib railing as the medical staff scrambled for the door. When the latch clicked shut, the room felt dangerously small. "You," Terrence said. His voice was no longer a roar, but a low, intense rumble that vibrated in the floorboards. "What is your name?" "Milan," she breathed, staring at the expensive Italian leather of his shoes. "Milan Pickett, sir. I'm just the cleaner. I didn't mean to. I'll leave, I swear." "You aren't going anywhere." Milan looked up, panic flooding her chest. "Please, I need this job. I'll go back to the basement. You won't see me." Terrence stepped closer, ignoring the grime on her uniform. He looked at her hands, red, chapped, with dirt ingrained so deep in the cracks of her skin it looked like a permanent tattoo of poverty. Then he looked at her face, seeing the dark smudge on her jaw that she had scrubbed at but couldn't remove, a stain of the life she was trying to escape. He looked at them, he said, gesturing to the twins. Both girls were watching Milan, their eyes heavy but focused. "I have paid millions to the best minds in Europe. They did nothing. You hummed for 30 seconds, and my daughters are breathing without fighting the air." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a sleek black phone, tapping a screen. "You are done scrubbing floors. As of this second, you are their primary caretaker." "Nanny?" Milan choked out. "Sir, look at me. I'm dirty. I have debts. I can't be—" "I don't care if you have the devil himself chasing you," Terrence interrupted, his eyes burning with a desperate, terrifying resolve. "You are the only thing that works. You stay in this room, you sleep here, you eat here. If they want a song, you sing. If they want the moon, you tell me and I will rip it out of the sky." He leaned in, his imposing frame casting a shadow over her. Milan trembled, the proximity to such raw, masculine power overwhelming. "Save them," he whispered, the command sounding dangerously like a plea. "And I will give you anything. Fail, and there is no hole deep enough to hide you." The nursery was no longer a tomb. It was a sanctuary. For 3 days, time seemed to blur into a soft rhythm of whispers and warmth. Milan didn't sleep in the servants' quarters anymore. She curled up on the rug between the two cribs, waking at the slightest rustle. Progress was measured in spoonfuls. First, it was just warm broth, sipped reluctantly from a silver spoon. Then, soft purees. Milan coaxed Bella and Sophia not with demands, but with stories. She told them tales of a brave mouse living in a bakery, her voice weaving a protective cocoon around them that blocked out the terrifying medical machinery. Terrence watched it all from the doorway, a silent sentinel. He saw the way the girls' color returned, faint pink blooming on their cheeks like the first light of dawn. He saw how they tracked Milan's movements with their eyes, tethered to her existence. "You cannot care for them if you collapse," Mrs. Higgins, the stern housekeeper, interrupted the quiet vigil on the 4th afternoon. She beckoned Milan with a stiff wave. "The master ordered it. You are to be cleaned up, properly." Milan was led to a guest bathroom larger than any apartment she had ever lived in. The water was scalding hot and smelled of lavender. For a long time, she just sat in the steam, staring at the water turning gray. She scrubbed her skin until it was pink and raw. She scrubbed away the grime of the alleyways, the grease of the soup kitchens, and the persistent dark smudge on her jaw that had marked her as street trash. When she emerged, the gray uniform was gone. In its place was a simple, soft dress of pale blue wool that fell to her knees, practical but elegant. Her hair, usually matted and hidden under a cap, fell in damp, golden waves around her shoulders. She walked back to the nursery feeling exposed without her layer of dirt. She felt like an imposter in the clean clothes, terrified that someone would point and laugh. Terrence was standing by the window, reviewing a file, his brow furrowed in his usual knot of aggression. He heard her enter and turned, the reprimand for her absence already forming on his lips. The words died in his throat. The creature he had hired, the shivering, dirty thing from the back door, was gone. Standing there was a woman of striking, fragile beauty. Her skin was porcelain pale, her eyes large and luminous, finally free of the grit that had shadowed them. Terrence dropped the file on the table. The sound was sharp in the quiet room. His gaze traveled from her bare feet to the curve of her neck, lingering on the pulse fluttering visibly in her throat. He had looked at her with gratitude before, as one looks at a useful tool. Now the look was different. It was darker, heavier. It was the look of a man who suddenly realizes that the treasure he was guarding wasn't just in the cribs. Milan hugged her arms, shrinking under the intensity of his stare, unaware that for the first time in years, Terrence wasn't thinking about safety. He was thinking about how soft she looked. The dining room at the Page estate was built to intimidate. The table was a long slab of mahogany that could seat 20, illuminated by a chandelier that cost more than Milan's entire life earnings. Usually, Terrence ate here alone, surrounded by silence and reports on rival syndicates. Tonight, however, the silence was broken by the clinking of spoons. "Stay," Bella whispered, clutching Milan's sleeve with her newfound strength. Her voice was still rasping, but the command in it was undeniable. She was her father's daughter. Terrence looked up from the head of the table. He gestured to the empty chair to his right, a seat that had remained vacant for 2 years. "Sit. If you leave, they stop eating. I cannot risk that." Milan perched on the edge of the velvet chair, terrifyingly close to the man who ruled the city's underworld. The table was set with roasted chicken and vegetables, more food than she had seen in a month. She stared at her plate, her hands trembling in her lap. "Eat," Terrence commanded, his voice softer than usual. He poured wine into his glass, the red liquid swirling like blood. "You lived on the streets?" It wasn't an accusation, it was a question. "For 2 years, sir," Milan murmured, keeping her eyes on the tablecloth. After my father's debts came due, I had nowhere else." Terrence watched her pick up a fork. He noticed she ate slowly, deliberately, savoring every bite with a reverence only the starving possess. "My wife died in this room," Terrence said suddenly. The confession hung in the air, heavy and sharp. "She sat where you are sitting. She wanted the girls to grow up soft, gentle." He took a long drink, his eyes darkening. "I failed her. I turned this house into a fortress, and my daughters started dying of sadness inside it. I thought power could fix everything. I was wrong." Milan looked up, meeting his gaze. For a moment, the barrier between master and servant dissolved. She didn't see the mafia don. She saw a man haunted by ghosts he couldn't shoot. "You didn't fail them," Milan said quietly. "You just forgot that flowers need sun, not just stone walls to protect them." Terrence froze, his glass halfway to his mouth. No one spoke to him like that. No one dared correct him. But looking at Milan, bathed in the warm light of the chandelier, feeding his daughters with a grace he had thought lost forever, he didn't feel anger. He felt a strange, terrifying pull in his chest, a crack in the armor he had welded shut the day he became a widower. He realized with a jolt of panic that he didn't want her to leave the table. He wanted to know what else she saw when she looked at him. The piece of the estate was a fragile glass bubble, and it shattered on a rainy Thursday morning. Milan was in the garden, pointing out a robin to the twins, who were wrapped in blankets in their strollers. For a moment, the world was just gray sky and green grass. Then, the shouting started at the front gates. "I know she's in there. Tell the little rat I want my money." Milan froze. The color drained from her face, leaving her ghost pale. She knew that voice. It was the voice of her nightmares, the voice that had chased her from alley to alley for 2 years. Vinny. She turned to the twins, her hands shaking. "We have to go inside, now." She rushed them toward the house, but the shouting grew louder. Vinny was at the iron gates, screaming obscenities, waving a piece of paper, her father's debt. The security guards were trying to hold him back, but he was loud, drunk, and desperate. "Milan, you think you can hide in a castle? You owe me." Milan stopped. Shame, hot and suffocating, washed over her. She couldn't let this filth touch the Page family. She couldn't let the girls see this. She turned to the head of security. "Take them inside, please." "Miss Milan," the boss said. "Take them," she screamed, her voice cracking. As the guards wheeled the confused twins away, Milan turned back to the gates. She had to leave. She had to surrender herself to Vinny, to lead him away from this sanctuary. She started running toward the gate, tears blurring her vision. "Milan!" The voice was like a thunderclap. Milan skidded to a halt. Terrence Page was walking down the driveway. He wasn't wearing a coat despite the rain. His sleeves were rolled up, revealing thick forearms corded with muscle. He walked with a terrifying, calm purpose. "Open the gate," Terrence ordered the guards. "Sir, he's armed." "Open it." The iron gates groaned open. Vinny stumbled forward, grinning with rotten teeth, thinking he had won. "Finally. Listen, Mr. Big Shot, this girl owes me 20 grand. You pay up or I take her." Terrence didn't stop walking until he was inches from Vinny's face. He looked down at the loan shark with the dispassionate curiosity of a man examining a cockroach. "She owes you nothing," Terrence said softly. "Her debts were paid the moment she saved my children." "That ain't how it works," Vinny spat, reaching for something in his jacket. It was the last mistake he ever made. Terrence moved faster than the eye could follow. There was a sickening crunch of bone, a flash of movement, and Vinny was on the ground, gasping, his arm bent at an unnatural angle. Terrence stood over him, his boot pressing onto Vinny's chest, crushing the air out of his lungs. "You came to my home," Terrence whispered, the sound more terrifying than any shout. "You screamed at the woman who holds my life in her hands. You upset my daughters." He pressed harder. Vinny's eyes bulged. "Please," Vinny wheezed. "No," Terrence answered. He looked up at Milan, who stood frozen in the rain, trembling. His eyes were dark, infinite pools of violence, but when they landed on her, they softened. "Go inside, Milan. This is men's work." As Milan turned and fled, sobbing, the sound of a single, silenced gunshot was swallowed by the rain. The rumors spread through the city's underbelly like a virus. The Page girls are eating. The wolf has his teeth back. Terrence's rivals had been circling like vultures, waiting for the grief to finally break him, waiting for the twins to die so they could carve up his empire. But now, the estate was no longer silent. There was laughter in the gardens. Terrence was seen at meetings again, his eyes clear, his focus razor-sharp. And they noticed the change. They noticed the woman. Sal, the butcher Moretti, sat in the back of a black sedan parked 3 blocks from the park, watching through binoculars. He saw the twins, looking pink-cheeked and alive, chasing a butterfly, and he saw her, the blonde woman in the simple blue coat who hovered over them like a guardian angel. "That's her," Sal grunted. "The maid?" "Yeah," his driver replied. "Word is, the boss is obsessed with her. She's the only one the kids listen to. Without her, they crumble." Sal smiled, a cold twisting of lips. "So, she's the glue. You break the glue, the family falls apart. And when Terrence is broken, we take the docks." The attack happened on a Tuesday. It was supposed to be a safe outing, a heavily guarded trip to the private aquarium the family owned. Milan held Bella's hand, pointing at the glowing jellyfish, her face illuminated by the blue tank light. She felt happy. For the first time in her life, she felt safe. She didn't see the man in the maintenance uniform slip through the restricted door. She didn't see the silenced pistol until it was pressed against her spine. "Don't scream," a voice hissed in her ear. "Walk to the exit, now." Milan froze. Her first instinct was to run, to scream for the guards. But then she looked down. Sophia was tugging at her skirt, smiling. "Nanny, look at the fish." If she screamed, the man would shoot. If a firefight started here, in this crowd, the girls could be hit. Terror, cold and absolute, washed over Milan. She looked up at the security cameras, praying Marcus was watching. She squeezed Bella's hand one last time, then let go. "Sweetheart," Milan whispered, her voice shaking but forcing a smile. "Go to Mr. Marcus. Tell him I forgot something in the car. Go, run." The twins hesitated, sensing the tension. "Go," urged Milan, pushing them gently toward the large security guard 10 feet away. As soon as they were out of arm's reach, the gun dug harder into her back. "Good girl," the man whispered. "Now move." Milan walked. She walked away from the light, away from the children she had learned to love, and into the darkness of the service corridor. As the door clicked shut behind her, she heard Marcus shout, but it was too late. She was gone. The aquarium security footage played on a loop in Terrence's office. Every time Milan let go of the girls' hands, that final, selfless push to save them, something inside Terrence fractured further. He wasn't shouting, he wasn't pacing. He sat behind his desk, perfectly still, radiating a coldness that made his seasoned lieutenants sweat. Upstairs, the silence had returned. The twins had stopped eating the moment Milan didn't come home. They were back in their beds, staring at the ceiling, fading away as if their life force had been severed. "We found the van, boss," Marcus said, his voice low. "Burnt out near the docks. It's Moretti's crew." Terrence stood up. He buttoned his suit jacket. He picked up the heavy silver pistol from his desk and checked the chamber. "Burn it," Terrence said. "Sir?" "Burn it all," Terrence clarified, walking toward the door. "Every warehouse Moretti owns, every safe house, every business front. I want his city to look like hell before I even touch him." That night, the city of Chicago learned why they called him the Ruthless. It wasn't a war, it was an extermination. Terrence moved through the city like a wraith. He kicked down doors of gambling dens, walking through gunfire as if he were immortal. He didn't care about the bullets flying past his head. He cared about the woman who had hummed his daughters to sleep. He found Moretti's lieutenant in a backroom poker game. Terrence didn't ask questions. He shot the man's guards before they could draw their weapons, then pinned the lieutenant to the table with a knife through his hand. "Where is she?" Terrence asked. His voice was devoid of humanity. It was the voice of a man who had already died. "I don't know. Sal took her to the—" Terrence twisted the knife. "The old refinery, west side. He's going to trade her for the territory." Terrence pulled the knife out and turned away, leaving the man bleeding. "Keep the territory," he muttered to himself as he walked out into the rain. "I'm taking the girl." He drove to the refinery alone. He didn't wait for backup. He rammed his armored SUV through the chain-link fence, the headlights cutting through the gloom of the abandoned industrial skeleton. He stepped out of the car, rain plastering his hair to his forehead. He held a gun in each hand. "Sal," Terrence roared, the sound echoing off the rusted metal tanks. "You wanted the monster? You got him." Gunfire erupted from the catwalks above. Terrence didn't flinch. He moved forward, firing with terrifying precision, dropping bodies with every step. He climbed the metal stairs, his eyes scanning the shadows, his heart pounding a single name. Milan. 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 He wasn't fighting for his empire tonight. He was fighting for the only person who had ever made his house feel like a home, and God help anyone standing in his way. The metal door groaned as Terrence kicked it open. The refinery office was silent, save for the dripping of rain through the rusted roof. Sal Moretti lay motionless in the corner, his reign over. Milan was tied to a chair in the center of the room, her face bruised, her eyes wide with terror. She flinched when the shadow loomed over her, expecting another blow. "Milan." The voice was cracked, raw. Milan looked up. Terrence stood there, his expensive suit ruined, his shirt soaked in blood that wasn't his. He looked like a demon rising from the pit. But as he dropped the guns and fell to his knees before her, his hands that had just ended a dozen lives, shook as they reached for her face. "Did they hurt you?" he rasped, his thumb grazing her cheek. "I knew you'd come," she whispered, collapsing into him as he cut the ropes. He lifted her as if she weighed nothing, carrying her out of the darkness and into the rain. The drive back to the estate was a blur of speed and silence. When the iron gates opened, the entire household staff was waiting, but they didn't matter. The front doors flew open, two small figures in pajamas sprinted out into the cold night air, barefoot on the stone steps. "Mama!" Bella screamed. It was the first time she had used the word. Terrence set Milan down. She fell to her knees on the wet driveway, opening her arms just in time to catch the twins as they collided with her, sobbing. They buried their faces in her neck, inhaling her scent, grounding themselves back to reality. Milan held them tight, rocking them, her tears mixing with the rain on their hair. Terrence stood back, watching the tableau. He saw his daughters, who had been dying of silence, now vibrant with life. He saw the woman who had walked through hell to protect them. He realized that his money, his guns, and his power were useless without the heart beating in the center of it all. He dropped to one knee beside them. The wet pavement soaked his trousers. Milan looked up, startled by his proximity, by the intense, worshipful look in his eyes. "I rule this city," Terrence said, his voice thick with emotion. He took Milan's hand, pressing a kiss to her scarred knuckles. "I can burn the world down to keep you safe, but I cannot make it a home. Only you can do that." He reached into his jacket pocket. There was no ring, he hadn't planned this, but he pulled off his own signet ring, the heavy gold bearing the family crest. He slipped it onto her thumb. It was too big, but he curled her fingers around it. "Marry me," he commanded, though it sounded like a prayer. "Save us. Be the mother they chose. Be the queen I need." Milan looked at the fearsome mafia boss, now kneeling in the rain, offering him his legacy. She looked at the girls clinging to her. She didn't see a monster. She saw her family. "Yes," she whispered, pulling him down into the embrace. For the first time in the history of the Page estate, the gates closed not to keep enemies out, but to hold the happiness in.